The voice pierced through my half-dream like a knife. It's 7 a.m. and you're still sleeping? Get up and make me breakfast. At first, I thought I was dreaming, maybe hearing an alarm, a noise from outside. But when I blinked awake, there she was. Standing in the doorway with her arms crossed like a general about to declare war. Linda Evans. My mother-in-law. Her voice filled the small Denver apartment with the same sharp energy I'd grown to dread over the past 3 weeks. I pushed myself up on the bed, my head spinning from exhaustion. The laptop beside me was still open, a spreadsheet glowing faintly on the screen, proof that I had stopped working only a few hours ago. 4 in the morning. That was when I'd finally submitted the last client report for the week. Good morning, I croaked, my voice rough from lack of sleep. I worked really late, Linda. Give me a few minutes, worked? She interrupted, letting out a short, sarcastic laugh. You mean sitting in bed pressing buttons all night? That's not work, Julia. That's playing on a computer. My stomach clenched. I bit my tongue because I'd learned long ago that arguing with Linda was like trying to stop a storm with a paper umbrella. Still, the sting of her words hit harder than usual. From the living room, her husband, Frank, called out, Honey, ask her to make some bacon this time, none of that rabbit food. Linda smirked. You hear that? Frank's tired of your salads. Make something real. I rubbed my temples. Linda, I was up until 4 finishing a project. Can you and Frank help yourselves this morning? There are eggs and bread in the fridge, she gasped as if I'd cursed. Excuse me? You're telling your husband's parents to cook for themselves? What kind of wife are you? I looked toward the closed door of the guest room, the room that had been theirs for the last 22 days. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I'm the kind who works 16 hours a day to pay the mortgage on this place. Her expression hardened. Don't take that tone with me, young lady. If you spent less time pretending to be a big shot and more time taking care of your home, maybe my son wouldn't have to eat cereal for dinner. That last line hit like a slap. I glanced toward the living room where Mark, my husband, was nowhere in sight. He'd already left for work before sunrise, as usual, leaving me to handle his parents. Again, Linda must have seen the flicker of frustration on my face, because she pounced, Don't look at me like that. We raised our boy right. He deserves a wife who respects her family, not someone who hides in a room all night typing nonsense. Something inside me snapped. The months of biting my tongue, of shrinking myself smaller just to keep peace, suddenly collapsed under the weight of that morning. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. Still in my oversized t-shirt, my hair a mess. You need to get out of my room, I said quietly. She froze. What did you just say? I repeated, more firmly this time, get out. This is my bedroom, and you don't get to barge in here yelling. For a split second, she looked genuinely shocked. No one had probably told her no in decades. Then her face darkened. This is my son's apartment, she hissed. You're just living here because he lets you. I laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. That's interesting, I said, reaching for the file on my nightstand. Because according to this mortgage statement, I pay half, sometimes more, of every bill. So unless you're planning to start contributing rent, you are guests here. Nothing more. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You ungrateful, Linda. I raised a hand, cutting her off before she could finish the insult. I've tried for 3 weeks to be polite. I've cooked, cleaned, smiled, and stayed quiet while you insulted everything I do. But not today. Not after working all night just to be yelled at in my own home. She stared at me, speechless. I walked to the door and held it open. You have 30 minutes to pack your things and leave. I'll call Mark to drive you to a hotel. Her face flushed red. You wouldn't dare. Try me. For a long moment, she just stood there, trembling with anger. Then she stormed out, muttering curses under her breath. When I finally shut the door, the silence felt almost unreal, like the air right after a thunderstorm. Heavy and still. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking. A part of me couldn't believe I'd actually said it. For 3 years, I had bent myself around Mark's family, desperate to keep the peace. But something about that morning, the exhaustion, the disrespect, the sheer absurdity of being screamed at after working all night, had finally pushed me past the breaking point. Down the hall, I heard drawers opening, suitcases thumping. Linda's sharp voice barking orders at Frank. Good. Let her pack. I reached for my phone. Texted Mark, we need to talk tonight. Alone. Then I tossed the phone aside and collapsed back onto the bed. For the first time in weeks, I didn't care about deadlines or clients or even the chaos beyond the door. For the first time, I'd stood up for myself. Outside the window, the sun had just started climbing over the Denver skyline. Light filtered through the blinds, catching the dust in soft, golden streaks. Somewhere in the living room, Linda's voice rose again, a final threat, maybe, or just one more complaint. But I barely heard it, because beneath the fear and exhaustion, something new was starting to bloom, small, fragile, but real relief. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe the fight would get worse. But right then, I felt the faintest taste of freedom, and it was enough to make me smile. The coffee shop on Blake Street was still half empty when I walked in. It smelled like roasted beans and quiet, exactly what I needed. I ordered my usual caramel latte, found a corner seat by the window, and stared at my reflection in the glass. The woman looking back at me barely resembled the confident digital consultant I used to be. My hair was tied in a messy knot, dark circles under my eyes. My posture slightly hunched, as if years of apology had curved my spine. I opened my laptop, pretending to work. But all I could think about was how my life had become one endless loop of exhaustion and compromise. Before Mark, I had been unstoppable. I ran my own business, late nights, endless projects, clients in 3 time zones. I thrived on it. My friends called me the machine. And yet, I loved it. The independence. The control. The knowledge that everything I built came from my own effort. Then I met him. Mark Evans, charming, kind, funny in a clumsy way. He worked in local finance, stable and grounded, everything my chaotic freelancer life wasn't. At first, he admired my ambition. He used to say, "You're the hardest working woman I've ever met." But admiration slowly turned into irritation. Then, resentment. He started coming home from work, tossing his tie on the couch, sighing, "You're still on that computer? Can't you ever take a break?" When I explained that deadlines meant survival for freelancers, he'd shrug. "You could get a real job, one with an office and coworkers." That word, real, began to haunt me. His mother, Linda, only made it worse. From day one, she looked at me like I was a strange experiment she didn't approve of. "She works from home," she whispered to Frank at our first family dinner. "So basically, she doesn't work at all." Mark laughed it off, and I did too, back then. But over time, her small jabs became heavier, sharper. Every visit came with comments about how women these days forget their place. And Mark never defended me. He'd just say, "She means well. Don't take it personally." I did. Every single time, when we bought our apartment, a 2-bedroom on the east side of Denver, I thought we were building a home together. But somehow, it became his mother's stage. She rearranged the furniture, criticized my decor choices, even replaced my favorite throw pillows because they were too modern. And Mark let her. Every time. Because Mom knows best. Now, sitting in that cafe, the weight of all those little humiliations pressed down on me at once. The way she'd hover behind me while I worked, watching, as if waiting to catch me pretending. The way Mark's silence spoke louder than her insults. The way I'd smile, nod, and swallow every ounce of anger because I didn't want to be the difficult wife. I took a sip of my coffee and opened the folder on my laptop labeled Evans Household. Inside were bills, contracts, and mortgage documents, my quiet proof that I wasn't crazy. That I did contribute. That I wasn't some lazy freeloader living off her son. A memory surfaced, 2 years ago, when Mark and I signed the papers. He'd said, "This is our start, Jules. Our foundation." I believed him. I believed us. Now that same foundation felt cracked and hollow, a place where I tiptoed instead of lived. My phone buzzed on the table. A new text from Mark. "Mark, Mom says you kicked her out of your room? What's wrong with you?" I stared at the screen. The knot in my chest tightened, but this time, it wasn't guilt. It was clarity. I typed back slowly, "Julia," she barged in screaming. "I told her to leave. You and I need to talk tonight." He didn't respond. I locked the phone and looked out the window. Across the street, a mother walked hand in hand with her daughter, both laughing, sunlight touching their faces. For a moment, I envied their simple peace, a peace that didn't need explanation or defense. I thought about my own mother, gone for years now. She'd been a quiet fighter, too. I remembered her saying once, "You can love someone and still outgrow the version of yourself they fell in love with." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. Now I did. I had outgrown the woman who kept shrinking to fit into someone else's comfort zone. I had outgrown the silence. I closed the laptop and whispered to myself, "No more." It wasn't anger this time, just resolve. The kind that comes when you finally stop asking for permission to exist. Outside, the city kept moving, cars honking, people rushing, the morning light spilling across the sidewalk. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel trapped inside my life. I felt like I was watching the door of my cage slowly unlock. The next morning, I was still half asleep when I heard the door slam open. "It's 7 a.m. and you're still sleeping?" Linda's voice pierced through the room like a siren. "Get up and make us breakfast. Frank's been waiting for his eggs for half an hour." My body jolted, heart pounding. I had gone to bed at 4, another late night meeting a client deadline, and every muscle in me ached from exhaustion. I blinked at her silhouette standing in the doorway, hair in perfect curls. Hands on her hips, lips pursed with the satisfaction of someone used to being obeyed. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Linda, I was up all night working. Mark said he'd handle breakfast today." Her eyes widened, mock surprise painted across her face. Working? You mean tapping on that computer of yours? That's not work, Julia. That's you pretending to be busy so you don't have to take care of your husband. That word, pretending, snapped something inside me. For weeks, I had swallowed every insult, told myself to endure just a little longer. But at that moment, standing in my own bedroom in my own home, I realized I didn't owe her another second of silence. I sat up slowly. My voice didn't rise, it steadied. You need to leave. She blinked. Excuse me? You and Frank, I said, pointing toward the door. You have 30 minutes to pack your things and get out of my house. Her jaw dropped. This is my son's apartment. You don't get to order me around in his home. I got out of bed, feet firm on the carpet. This isn't just his apartment. I pay the mortgage. I pay the bills. And for the last 3 weeks, I've paid with my sanity. You are guests here, Linda, and your stay is over. Her face flushed a violent red. How dare you speak to me like that? After everything I've done for you? You think you're better than me just because you stare at a screen all day? Behind her, Frank appeared in the hallway, adjusting his robe, clearly having heard everything. Linda, calm down, he muttered, rubbing his eyes. Maybe we should just, don't tell me to calm down. She snapped at him before turning back to me. You've poisoned my son against his family. That's what women like you do, break homes apart. I almost laughed. Funny. Because it feels like you've been breaking mine since the moment you moved in. For a long, suffocating second, the only sound in the room was the hum of my computer still running beside the bed. Linda stared at me, shaking with disbelief. You'll regret this, she hissed. You have no idea what I'm capable of. I think I do, I said evenly. That's why I'm done being quiet. I walked past her, opened the closet, and pulled down the extra suitcases she and Frank had stored. You can start with these. She looked at me as if I had slapped her. Frank sighed, muttered something under his breath, and started gathering his things. But Linda wasn't ready to back down. This isn't over, she said, her voice trembling with rage. When Mark finds out, he'll know exactly what kind of woman you are. I met her eyes. Good. Then we'll both stop pretending. Her glare could have burned holes through the walls, but I didn't flinch. I stood there until she turned away, muttering curses under her breath as she stomped toward the guest room. When the door finally slammed shut behind her, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from release. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding in the stillness she left behind. The air felt different, lighter, sharper, alive again. I checked the clock. 7:22, they had 8 more minutes before their time was up. I didn't wait to see if they actually left. I got dressed, grabbed my keys and laptop bag, and walked out the front door into the crisp Denver air. The moment the door clicked behind me, I felt something inside click, too, a small, solid sound of resolve. I wasn't just walking out of the apartment. I was walking out of the version of myself that had been afraid to say no. Outside, the sky was the pale gold of early morning. My breath made small clouds in the cold air. For the first time in a long time, the world felt wide open, like it was waiting for me to decide what came next. I whispered to myself as I walked toward the car, they wanted a wife who stayed quiet. They got a woman who finally woke up. The cafe was half empty that afternoon, filled with the soft hum of jazz and the hiss of milk steaming from the barista's wand. I sat near the window, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. I hadn't slept since morning. The house had been silent when I left. But my phone wasn't. Helen's name flashed across the screen again and again, message after message. Her words like small blades, ungrateful woman. You'll regret the day you crossed me. Mark deserves better than a cold-hearted parasite like you. At first, I just stared at them, disbelief tightening in my chest. Then something inside me steadied. I took screenshots of every single one, saved them in a folder, and blocked her number. I wasn't afraid anymore. Just tired. So tired. That's when my phone buzzed again, this time with Mark's name. We need to talk. 5 p.m. The cafe on 6th. I typed only one word, okay. He arrived 15 minutes late. Same jacket, same distracted expression, the look of a man already rehearsing his excuses. He sat down without meeting my eyes. What the hell happened this morning? I took a breath. You mean your mother storming into my room and screaming at me until I kicked her out? He winced. She told me you attacked her. Attacked? I almost laughed. Mark, she's been verbally attacking me for 3 weeks. I've been working 16-hour days, feeding your parents, cleaning up after them while they insult everything I do. What did you expect me to do, bow? Julia, he said quietly, she's just old. Set in her ways. You know how she gets. Yes, I said. And you know how I get when someone treats me like I'm worthless. He rubbed his forehead. You're overreacting. You could have just waited until I talked to her. Now she's furious, Dad's upset, and I'm stuck in the middle of this mess. There it was, the sentence I'd been waiting for. You're overreacting. I leaned forward. Mark, your mother called me lazy. She said I wasn't a real wife because I don't wear an apron or clock into an office. She barged into our bedroom. She screamed at me in my own home. And you think I'm the problem? He looked around nervously, lowering his voice. Can we not make a scene? People are staring. No, Mark. For once, you should look at the scene. This is what our marriage looks like, me cleaning up the wreckage while you apologize for everyone else. His jaw tightened. You're making me choose between you and my parents. I shook my head slowly. No. I'm asking you to see the damage they cause. I'm asking you to choose respect. He didn't respond. Just stared into his coffee like it might offer him an escape route. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. Mom's not well. She's been under stress. If you could just be patient for one more week, they'll go home and everything will calm down. I felt the words hit like cold rain. 1 more week, I repeated. You said that 2 weeks ago. Then 3. And you know what? I've been patient enough to lose sleep, lose peace, lose myself. Julia, no, I cut him off. My voice didn't shake. If they don't leave, I will. And if I leave, it's not for a night, it's for good. Mark blinked, stunned, like he hadn't heard me right. You're really going to end our marriage over this? I looked at him, the man I once thought would fight beside me, not against me. No, Mark. I'm ending it because you won't fight for me. The silence between us stretched. Somewhere in the background, the barista laughed at something a customer said. The normalcy of it made everything feel surreal, like my marriage was ending to the soundtrack of ordinary life. Mark ran his hands through his hair, exhaling hard. You're impossible, he muttered. Always have to be right. Not right, I said quietly. Just done. I stood up, slid a 20 under my untouched cup, and picked up my bag. For a second, I thought he might say something that would stop me, something true, something brave. But all I heard was a soft, defeated sigh. As I walked out of the cafe, the cold Denver wind hit my face, sharp and freeing. My chest still ached, but the weight that had sat there for years was starting to lift. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel crazy. I just felt awake. I texted my lawyer that night. I'd like to start the divorce process. And when I turned off my phone, the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was peaceful. The motel room was small, just big enough for a bed, a desk, and a lamp that flickered every few minutes. The walls smelled faintly of bleach and lemon, not home, but clean. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I hadn't heard from Mark all day, though I knew he'd come eventually. He always came when he needed something: peace, answers, control. The knock came at 9 p.m. I opened the door, and there he was, hair messy, eyes red, holding a paper bag of takeout like it was some kind of peace offering. Julia, he said softly. Can I come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside. He placed the bag on the small table and looked around the room. This place is awful, he muttered. It's quiet, I said simply. That's more than I can say for home. He sighed, sinking onto the edge of the bed. You didn't have to leave. You could have just waited it out. Mom's calming down. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Because I've got about 20 screenshots that say otherwise. He rubbed his face. She didn't mean it. She's under stress. And I'm under siege, I snapped. Do you even hear yourself, Mark? Every excuse you make for her is another wound you hand me. He looked up, surprised by the sharpness in my voice. You've changed, he said. Yes, I said quietly. I stopped apologizing for needing respect. There was a long silence. The kind that feels like the moment before a storm hits. He stood and began pacing the small room. You're blowing this out of proportion. Families argue. It's normal. No, I said, shaking my head. It's not normal to be insulted in your own home. It's not normal to be treated like a maid because you work from home. It's not normal to be called lazy by people who don't even understand what you do. He turned on me, frustrated. What do you expect me to do, Julia? Throw my parents out on the street? I expect you to be my husband, I said. Not their obedient son. He stared at me, chest rising and falling with anger. That's not fair. I took a step closer. What's not fair is me working 16 hours a day to pay half the mortgage while your mother calls me a parasite. What's not fair is me losing sleep, appetite, and peace just to keep this marriage alive. He swallowed hard. I'm trying, okay? No, Mark, I said softly. You're avoiding. There's a difference. He looked at me for a long moment, eyes flicking to the floor, the wall, anywhere but my face. So what now? He asked finally. You want a divorce? I let out a shaky breath. I don't want a divorce, Mark. I want a partner. But if I can't have that, then yes, I want a divorce. He flinched like I'd struck him. You don't mean that. I do, I said. I've spent years trying to earn peace in a place that only takes from me. I'm done trying. He crossed his arms, his voice rising. You're selfish. My parents took me in when I had nothing. The least you could do is show them some gratitude. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Gratitude? For what? For calling me a failure every morning? For walking into our bedroom uninvited? For treating me like I don't belong in my own house? His face hardened. You're turning into someone I don't even recognize. Good, I said. Because the woman you used to recognize was dying in that house. The air between us felt heavy, thick with everything unsaid. He tried again, his tone softer this time. Just give me time, okay? A few more days. I'll talk to them. I'll figure it out. I shook my head. No more time. You've had plenty. He frowned. So what, this is it? You're walking away? I met his gaze. If they don't leave, I will. And if I leave, it's not temporary. It's final. He stared at me, his lips parting, but no words came. His silence told me everything. I turned toward the window. Outside, the city lights blurred behind the rain. My reflection looked back at me, tired, pale, but strangely calm. Behind me, Mark spoke, his voice low. You'll regret this. I didn't turn around. Maybe. But at least it'll be my choice to regret. He stood there for a moment longer, then left without another word. The sound of the door closing was sharp and clean, like the click of a lock on a cage finally opening. I sat on the bed, my heart pounding but steady. My eyes burned, but no tears came. Not this time. For years, I'd waited for Mark to change. For his parents to see me. For peace to come from someone else's effort. But peace isn't something you wait for, it's something you build. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I'm ready, I said simply. That evening, I walked past our apartment building on my way home from the grocery store. Through the window, I saw the same flickering light in the living room, the same shadows moving, Helen's voice faintly audible even from outside. Mark was sitting there, slumped on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. For a brief second, a part of me mourned the dream we'd built together, the dinners, the laughter, the promises. But the larger part of me knew the truth, it had been dying for years. I turned and walked away. The night air felt cold. But the kind of cold that clears your lungs, the kind that makes you feel alive again, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like running back. The day the divorce papers came through, I didn't cry. There was no dramatic music, no breakdown on the kitchen floor, just silence. A silence that felt heavy, but clean. I signed my name one last time, handed the pen back to my lawyer, and whispered, "Thank you." Mark didn't show up. He'd sent his lawyer instead, probably too proud or too ashamed to face me. Maybe both. When I walked out of the courthouse, the Denver air bit at my skin, thin, cold, almost sharp. It felt like a baptism. I rented a small studio apartment near Capitol Hill, with creaky wooden floors and a window that overlooked the skyline. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I set up my laptop on the little dining table, strung fairy lights around the window, and hung a small note above my desk. Peace lives where you protect it. For the first time in years, I worked without the sound of Helen's complaints or Mark's sighs in the background. Just me, my coffee, and the hum of quiet ambition. Days bled into weeks, and work poured in. Clients doubled. I started sleeping again. Eating again. Living again. But freedom, as it turns out, is never free. 3 months after the divorce, an envelope came in the mail. It was from the bank, notice of foreclosure proceedings, delinquent mortgage payments. At first, I laughed bitterly. Of course, I muttered. He's still not paying. I called the bank to confirm. Mark had fallen behind on 3 months of payments. Helen and Frank were still living there. Insisting the bank wait until things stabilized. The irony was almost poetic. The woman who called me lazy now lived rent-free in a home she couldn't afford. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Let the bank take it. Let the house disappear. But then I realized, that apartment wasn't just bricks and walls. It was mine too. My money had built half of it. My nights, my labor, my sanity. So I did what I'd always done. I worked harder. For 6 weeks, I barely slept. I took on extra clients, managed double shifts, and saved every cent. When I had enough, I called the bank. "This is Julia Evans," I said. "I want to settle the mortgage in full and buy out my ex-husband's share." The banker paused. "Are you sure, ma'am? That's a lot of money." I smiled. "Yes. I'm very sure." The transaction took a month to finalize. When it did, the property title arrived with my name, sole owner. I sat on the floor of my tiny apartment, holding the document in my hands, and cried, not out of sadness, but out of something deeper. Relief. Victory. Power. Of course, Mark found out. He always did. He stormed into my office one morning, unannounced, his face flushed with anger. "You went behind my back," he shouted. "You stole our home." I didn't even look up from my laptop. "Correction, I bought it. Legally. You missed 6 payments, Mark. The bank was going to take it." He slammed his fist on my desk. You think this makes you better than me? I met his gaze, calm and steady. No. It just makes me responsible for my own peace. He froze, thrown off by my tone. You're unbelievable. No, I said. I'm finally believable. You just never listened. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. He turned and stormed out, muttering curses under his breath. I didn't stop him. The sound of the door slamming felt strangely familiar, but this time, it didn't hurt. It echoed like closure. A few days later, I drove to the old apartment. The neighborhood looked the same, but I didn't. Helen was outside, screaming at a moving crew. Frank sat in a folding chair, looking defeated. When she saw me, she sneered. Oh, look who decided to show up. The queen of betrayal herself. I just smiled. Actually, Helen, I came to remind you that the eviction notice expires tomorrow. Her face turned crimson. You can't do this. You heartless. I can, I interrupted softly. And I did. She lunged forward, but Frank grabbed her arm. Enough, Helen, he said quietly. Let's go. For a second, her fury faltered, replaced by exhaustion, maybe even shame. She looked smaller than I remembered. I turned away, walked up the steps, and unlocked the door. Inside, the apartment was messy, dishes piled in the sink, furniture scratched, curtains drawn tight. The ghosts of shouting still clung to the air, but as sunlight poured through the window, dust floating like glitter, I realized something. It wasn't haunted anymore. It was empty. And it was mine. Over the next few weeks, I cleaned every corner, repainted the walls, and replaced every broken piece. The smell of lemon and pine filled the rooms again, the same scents I'd loved when we first moved in one night. As I stood by the window looking out at the Denver skyline, I felt something deep and unfamiliar, stillness, not the kind of silence that follows pain, but the kind that follows peace. I whispered into the empty room, you tried to bury me here, Helen. But all you did was plant me. Mark tried one last time to call me months later. He left a voicemail, I miss you. We could have fixed it. I deleted it without listening to the rest. By then, I'd already started seeing Daniel, a quiet, kind man with patient eyes and a laugh that sounded like home. He never tried to control me, never raised his voice. Never made me feel small. When he helped me move the last box into the apartment, he looked around and said, feels like freedom in here. I smiled, touching the doorframe. That's because it is. And that night, when we sat on the couch, the same couch where I'd once cried myself to sleep, I finally felt what a home was supposed to feel like, not a place to survive, but a place to belong. She hadn't lost a marriage, I thought, resting my head on Daniel's shoulder. She had gained herself. Outside, the city lights flickered softly. The night was quiet. Peaceful. Mine. Morning sunlight spilled across the living room, tracing golden lines on the wooden floor. The city outside hummed quietly, Denver waking up, soft and unhurried. Julia sat on the couch with a cup of coffee, barefoot, wrapped in one of Daniel's oversized shirts. The smell of cinnamon toast drifted in from the kitchen, where he was humming to himself, some old rock song she didn't recognize, but already loved. It was Sunday. No deadlines. No shouting. No chaos, just peace. She leaned back, letting her head rest against the couch, eyes half closed. The light caught on the photo frames hanging on the wall, new memories replacing old ghosts. One showed her and Daniel at the mountain lake near Estes Park. Wind in their hair, both laughing so hard their eyes were closed. Another captured her with her laptop, coffee mug in hand, the caption underneath written in Daniel's handwriting, Boss Lady, Peacemaker, Heart Healer. She smiled. For years, that apartment had been a battlefield, a place where her voice was drowned out, her worth measured by someone else's comfort. But now, every corner whispered a different truth. She had survived. She had rebuilt. She had won. When Daniel brought her breakfast, she teased him, you know, you're spoiling me. He chuckled, setting the plate on her lap. Good. Maybe someone should. Julia looked at him. Really looked, and realized how different this love felt. Quiet. Steady. Equal.no. One asked her to shrink so the other could shine.no. One made her apologize for needing rest, space, or respect. Daniel didn't save her. He simply made room for her to exist, fully, freely, loudly. That, she thought, was love. Later that afternoon, Julia sat by the window with her journal. The same window she'd once stared out of, wondering how to escape. Now, it framed her piece like a photograph. She wrote, I didn't lose a husband. I lost the version of myself that kept begging to be seen. She paused, pen hovering, then added, and in losing her, I found someone new, stronger, kinder, and finally free. She closed the journal and exhaled. It wasn't just a happy ending, it was a beginning. A few weeks later, she invited her friends over for dinner, the first time the apartment was filled with laughter that wasn't forced. They toasted to second chances and to peace. Hard. One of them asked, do you ever regret it? Leaving him? Julia smiled softly. No. I regret waiting so long to leave. The table fell silent for a heartbeat, then everyone nodded, understanding, because it wasn't bitterness in her tone, it was truth. The kind that comes from healing, not from hate. That night, when the guests left and the apartment quieted again, Julia stood at the window, watching the city lights blink like fireflies in the distance. Daniel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Thinking again? He whispered, always, she said, smiling. He kissed her temple. You know, I've never met anyone who built herself back from the ground like you did. Julia turned slightly, resting her hand on his chest. That's the thing about hitting the ground, she said softly. You realize it's solid enough to stand on. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of laughter from a nearby street, young people, free, alive. Julia's heart swelled. She had spent years apologizing for being too much, too driven, too ambitious, too independent. Now she knew, those weren't flaws. They were her wings, she whispered to herself, almost like a prayer. I didn't lose a marriage. I gained myself. When she turned off the lights and lay beside Daniel that night, the apartment was quiet again. The kind of quiet that feels like safety. She thought about Helen, about Mark, about all the ways she had once been told she wasn't enough. And then she smiled, not from pride, but from peace, because finally, she didn't need anyone else to tell her who she was. She already knew. The final line of her story wasn't about revenge or victory. It was about freedom. About waking up each day in a life she chose, one built not from fear, but from faith in herself. And in the stillness of that night, Julia Evans finally understood, sometimes the happiest endings are simply the ones where you come home, to yourself.